are about to view Anglican EdComm's recording of the Aspiring Leaders Network launch 2017, entitled Leading with Influence, the Power of Presence, Positive Relationships and Collective Responsibility, delivered by Emeritus Professor Patrick Duignan.
There's a problem about that. It creates unrealistic expectations. So it makes me nervous to get introduced like that, because the problem now is I have to try and live up to that. But I've thought this through and I have a solution if things don't go too well. I'll blame all of you, the audience, and I have that on good authority. There's a story, you know, of Oscar Wilde and his famous ways. He had a great friendship with James Whistler, the American painter, and every time he'd go to New York, they'd have breakfast together. And at one stage, Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest, was playing on Broadway. And the following morning, after the play, they met for breakfast. And already Whistler had seen the morning papers, and it had sort of panned the play, said it hadn't really gone down that well. So they're talking away, and then he says, and by the way, he said, Oscar, how did your play go last night? And Oscar said, the play was fantastic, it was marvelous, it was great, but the audience was a total failure. So there you are, that's how I can get around this. Look, I want to talk to you about some of my thoughts on leadership over a number of years. I will talk a bit about authentic leadership, which I started researching way back in the early 90s and have written a lot about, and wrote a legacy paper for the Journal of Educational Administration in 2014. 15. And it was, the name of the paper is Authentic Leadership, the ideal, the rhetoric and the reality, because this is what I find out about any form of leadership. You have the ideal of it, we have a lot of rhetoric about it. For example, collaborative leadership or distributed leadership is probably the most guilty one of all in terms of rhetoric. And then the reality, what is the reality? And what is the reality in the real world of schools? It's all right to write about it and talk about it and give talks at conferences about it, but how does it work in the real world of schools? So if it doesn't work in the real world, well, you might have to go back to the drawing board. So that paper, by the way, won the International Paper of the Year from Emeritus Publishing from the UK, so I'm pretty proud of that. So I do know something about authentic leadership and authenticity and ethical leadership because I've spent so many years studying it, practicing it, researching it, and I hope practicing the reality. What I want to do, though, is to talk to you generally about leadership and an approach to leadership, and to suggest to you that leadership isn't rocket science. At its base, it's quite simple, and I'll bring it down to that level as I understand it. Don't forget, everything I say is my opinion. It is based on quite a lot of research and a lot of practice. I've been a practicing administrator at a lot of levels, from school level to tertiary level. You think you have tough people in schools? You should try to run university departments across 7 campuses. At ACU we had 7 campuses, and when everybody thinks they're a prima donna, it's pretty tough in terms of leadership. So I have had a bit of experience in that area. So I want to talk to you about leading with influence. And I want to point out to you that at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. If you don't have any influence, you might as well go work for the bank, because they pay better, I'm told. But that's not why you became an educator in the first place, for money. I know that. If it was, you would have left because you have the skills to go out and get better money elsewhere. So let's establish that first. It's not really, when you become an educator, as I did, it's not about the money. It's about a lot of things, but it's mostly about children and learning and a passion to make a difference. I became a teacher. Why did I become a teacher? For those reasons I just said to you. I was asked by the head of a school to be a teacher after I took the equivalent of the Leaving Cert for 1 year. I loved it. I wasn't too bad at it. Not great, but not too bad at it. And I felt I did have a calling. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. I think teaching is a calling. It's a vocation, in fact, and I'll come back to that point because it's a very important point in terms of being passionate about what you do. So I want to talk to you about leading with influence and how you do that. How your presence and the quality of your presence is extraordinarily important in relationships. How you develop positive relationships. And there's a lot written about collaborative leadership and distributed leadership. But I think if you only make structural changes to accommodate people getting together, it's never going to work over the long haul. It may work for a while you have enthusiastic people around who are committed to it, and then suddenly it sort of falls apart at the seams. You have to find a different glue. And I'm going to share what I think the glue is with you about what I would refer to as collective sense of responsibility for the quality of learning and learning outcomes in your schools, for your students. I'll repeat it. You need to develop a collective sense of responsibility. I even elevate it to the level of an ethic, the collective ethic of responsibility, that we are professionals, we are teachers, it's a collegial profession, we have to work together. So it comes from within. It's the professional thing to do. It's not in response to making structural changes or bringing this group together or that group together. I'll come back to that. It's certainly not a little bag, and I've noticed this over the years. You know, you can have, people talk about your experience as a leader. Well, that's great, but there are always new challenges, and sometimes the experience you've had before may not help you that much, believe it or not, in new circumstances. And anyway, I've recognized some people over the years, ones who always emphasize the amount of experience they have. I wonder, do they have that experience, or have they had 1 year and repeated it 30 times or 20 times and haven't learned anything in between? I'm serious about that. Experience is great so long as you learn and grow along the way. So the bag of tricks would be where you'd have a fix for every challenge, every new challenge. And you now know from your own experience already in leadership positions that doesn't work. You can't get into the doctor's bag, as it were, and pull out some medicine and fix the problem. It doesn't work like that because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with different types of people. You're dealing with people who can think for themselves. So it's more about relationship and presence is what I'm going to be arguing. So it's not a bag of tricks or skills. It is a quality and there's a character to it. You will be judged in terms of your honesty and your integrity and your character. And those, I believe, who can stand out in terms of their character will have an easier path in influencing others. If you're, in other words, a model for others. I mean, you can be a model in many ways. It can be the values you hold, but it's no good holding values unless you practice them. People, if you preach one thing and do the other, people get cynical, don't they? They see you saying one thing, and we get lots of it, rhetoric, but then you don't back it up with your behavior, with the way you act. What am I going to refer to in the session? Well, just a few points that you can have a quick read down through. I do want to suggest to you that leadership, we'll demystify it a little bit. It's not that complex at its basics, and that's what I want to talk about. Successful leadership is not rocket science. I will also reflect on some core facets. I call them facets, not dimensions. I don't like the word dimension because dimensions divide something up into lines and so on. Facets are like the facets of a diamond, and every way you look, which way you look at it, you see different flashes and different colors. And I think leadership is more like the diamond than it is anything that you can carve up into, as we used to do for many, many years. The research on leadership used to divide things up into task-oriented, people-oriented, as if it were that simple. Well, it's not simple in that way, but actually, when we talk about it in terms of relationships and presence, I think it is simple at the end of the day. If you asked me to define leadership, I would define it simply as an influence relationship. And you could add the rest of it, because we all might have different outcomes that we require, or that we wish for. So, an influence relationship to achieve what? Certain goals, right? Well, the goals might differ across individuals and schools. So you'd have to finish that as to what the influence relationships are meant to do and achieve. And I want to also talk about core values and moral purpose. Now, Michael Fullan and people like that talk about moral purpose all the time. What is it, though? What would moral purpose be? Well, moral purpose for me is often encapsulated in a short, pithy statement that says, this is why we come to school on a Monday morning, and this is why we persevere right throughout the week until Friday afternoon when we're all very tired, because there's a moral purpose for why we do it. And the moral purpose always includes the students, the children in some way. It's about learning. In fact, it's all about learning at the end of the day. So moral purpose would be something like, I saw one that I thought was good, was creating opportunities and outcomes for all our students. I should preface that by saying creating quality opportunities and outcomes for all our students. What it is if you have a vision statement for your school, you would go through it and debate it and discuss it and say, what's the essence? What is it we're really here for? Why do we come on the Monday and stay all week and so on? And come to an agreement about a short statement. That for me is the moral purpose. It would be why you would measure almost everything up against it to see, is this worth doing? Is that worth doing? And if you have competing practices and so on, which is more likely and most likely to deliver towards the moral purpose? We also have core values. All our schools that here in this room are based on Christian values. They're extraordinarily important values to us, but if we were to write them up on the board, we might have some divergence, but not very much. I did this exercise. I lived for 3.5 years in Brunei, and when I was going there, I thought, oh my God, I'm going into a Muslim country. I don't really understand very much about the culture or the religion. And we had a lot of students from Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. That was at the University of New England in those days. So I thought, okay, here I will ask them to come into the room with me. I was teaching them anyway in subject areas. And we'll have a discussion on values across cultures and across religions. Looking back on it, it was sort of high-risk stuff in a way. But overall, we came to the conclusion that the values were very much the same overall. As human beings, we all have desire to be honest. We like people who are honest with us. We like people who tell us the truth. We like people who respect us. And on. You could now write down the list and you could compare it around the table, and I'll bet you'd develop similar lists. I'm not going to say that there would be 100% the same. Do that sometime, just in your group. Get individual values. What do you value most? And within your Christian context or Christian school. So we'll come back to values a little bit later on. And then finally, I want you to think about, what is all this meaning for me in terms of practice tomorrow morning or the morning after or wherever. So one of the things is that you need to be able to go away from here and say to yourself, and that's from everything else you've heard here tonight as well, okay, there may be a couple of areas I could look at more closely, given that you're most likely pretty good in most of the things you do, but no matter how good we are, we can always be better. We can always improve ourselves. And I am of that nature. I get up every morning wondering, you know, what's new today? What can I learn today? And how can I become a better Patrick? Because it is all about me at the end of the day. It's me in relationships. And this applies to my private life as well as my professional life. So leadership comes from within. Now when I say within, I'm not talking about ego and selfish within. I'm talking about me, the human being, with my values, my character, my belief systems, and so on. So you'd be coming, all of you, out of a particular value system and belief system. And part of the challenge for you as a leader in that context, in your schools, is to live up to that. So you have to know what they are first. So that's what I mean by looking within. It comes from within, but of course it operates through relationships. You have to engage with others if you're going to influence and achieve certain outcomes. I was always looking at the definitions of leadership in the textbooks over the years. Some of them were highly complicated, some of them were long, some of them were unwieldy, I thought. It was only when I read Joseph Roth's book that I thought, wow, it's simpler than all these other people are saying. And his statement was, leadership is an influence relationship among leaders and followers who intend real changes that reflect their mutual purposes. Now you could play around with the language in there to suit your own particular philosophy of leadership, but I can't see how you can get away from this concept of an influence relationship to achieve certain ends. That's why I said you could finish it, the definition of leadership. You want to achieve influential relationships in order to achieve this and this and this. These are the goals that you would have in your statement of your school. One of the great business leaders and Harvard professor, John Maxwell, said the true measure of leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. Leadership is not about titles, positions, or floor charts. It is about one life influencing another. I really like that last line. It's about one life influencing another. And may I say this to you, the students in your school want to be influenced. And when you ask students who've left school and to think of teachers that they admire, and ask then, why do you admire them? What do they say? There's a pattern to their answers. They'll always say something like this, that they made a difference in my life. They told me I could do something. They gave me a belief. They gave me self-confidence. They gave me self-belief and a confidence. I heard at the annual awards in Canberra, when I was president of Australian Council of Education Leaders, 3 years in a row, students, graduate students out of year 12 thanking their teachers. And all of them said similar things, and it all had to do with the fact that the teachers had given them a sense of self-belief and a sense of confidence that they could go out into a difficult world. That's what it's all about at the end of the day. Now, of course, subject is important, because if I go out into the world and I can't count and I can't write, I'm not going to be very confident, am I? So subject matter is sacred in that sense to me, but it's not the be-all and end-all. There's more to it than that. So it's character formation, it's giving people a sense of confidence. I often ask teachers, can you reflect on this last week, and how many times do you think you enhanced the self-belief and confidence of your students? Good question to ask. It's a different focus. Yet that's what students think. And basically the question was asked, what is it you want most from your teachers? And there was a general pattern across saying, I want them to know my name and pronounce it correctly. Now you might think that's a kind of trivial sort of answer. It's not. What are they actually saying? They want to be valued as human beings. We all do. So this is about valuing. Your presence to others, as we'll see in a moment, is about showing you value other people. And it comes from the very core of our belief as Christians. Respect the dignity and worth of others who are made in God's image and likeness. Isn't that right? That's what we say we believe. You might have slightly different words for it than I have, but that's at the core of our Christian beliefs. When you say that, by the way, when you say respect the dignity and worth of others who is made in God's image and likeness, that's the jet lag now, then I'm saying to you that that has huge implications for the way you behave. You can't then go away and be uncultured, as it were, and shout and rant and rave and so on, and treat people with disrespect. When you say you believe, so you see now what I'm getting at is your core values. When you say you have these values, you better live up to them. Otherwise you'll be seen as a fraud. I want to suggest to you that leadership is not all that complex. I see it in terms of the following concepts: presence, relationships, influencing, and then leadership emerges from that. So let's go back to the presence. Your quality of your presence is extraordinarily important. It's something you need to think about and develop, and you can become better and better at being present to people and for people. And this applies in your private life as well as it does in your professional life. Relationships are important, so when you get presence in relationships, you will get influencing, you will be able to influence, and leadership emerges. So a concept here, an idea here, leadership is not something you would say, I'm going to go back into the school on Monday and be a leader. It doesn't really work like that. Leadership is an emergent concept. It emerges out of the other things, the ordinary everyday things you do and how well you do them, but it's especially about the relationship side of those things you do. You may have principle or whatever other label you have written on your door, but it doesn't guarantee you anything in terms of leadership. It doesn't guarantee you leadership. Leadership is earned through the everyday ongoing engagement and activities and interactions that we have with other people. They might not come out and proclaim it and shout it from the hilltops, he or she's a leader, but they will talk about it. They will think about it. But they will above all behave towards you in terms of whether they respect you as a leader or not. So that's what I mean when I say leadership is an emergent concept. It grows out of the way you do things, the way you interact, the way you relate, your presence in your relationships, in other words. Let me simplify it even further. I believe authentic presence, being really, truly present so that people recognize that it's you, a genuine, authentic person that they're engaging with. If they believe that, and they believe you're a person of character, a lot's going to happen. A lot of good things, a lot of positive things is going to happen in terms of influencing. I will present it to you in terms of a little formula. And I'm going to state this formula in the negative, but that's for effect. It's hard for me to think of somebody who has no presence. Is that right? Although there's some people I prefer that they didn't have any presence at all, because it's usually negative. So we might want to think about that one. Anyway, let's see the formula, how it works. The thing is that it's very difficult to have no presence. But you could have negative presence or positive presence or be lukewarm or whatever. But I want to state it this way, just so you see the thinking behind it. If you have no presence with the other, it's very difficult to have a relationship with them. And this is, again, in our private lives. Isn't that a fair comment to make? If you're half present, it's not going to be appreciated in your partnerships. Or, of course, if you're not present at all, relationships will suffer. So no presence equals no relationship. No relationship, the bad news is no influence. I cannot see how you can influence people if you can't relate to them or you don't have a relationship with them. Because you can't force them to do it. That's not influence. That's use of raw power, which usually doesn't work. A great motivational guru told me 40 years ago, you can, through power, you can make people move, but you don't with them. They will do it grudgingly and to the minimum level. But if you really want, as we often talk about it, 110% out of people, then it's motivational approaches. It's real presence in real relationships that's most likely to deliver that kind of influence. And you want to hear the really bad news. No influence equals no leadership. Now let's go back over that. You're in leadership positions. You want to influence. You have to look at the quality of your presence. That'll depend on your character or how you're perceived, on your values, not the espoused values, because it's got to be the values that you practice, because the rhetoric is everywhere. And you've been judged all the time by others. They're making up their minds about you, whether they would follow you or not. They may move in your direction, but movement is not what we're after. Movement, it's motivation, it's passion that we're after. What is presence? Now, I'm well aware of the time that we have together, so I probably can't dwell much on this one, but I want you're going to get this online. This is going to go up online. This would be a good little activity to conduct with a few of your colleagues. You know, when we think of someone with presence, what do we mean that they have presence? We do sometimes say, this person has presence. What do we mean by that? I did a whole major research project on that question, really. What is presence? How do you know it? Would you know it when you see it? What are the characteristics of presence? What are the ingredients? You can put a whole lot of language around it. Think of somebody who's present for you or to you. Really present now. That you would pluck them out from other people and say, yeah, that person has real presence. What do you mean by that? Is it the values they have? The ethical standards they live up to? What special qualities? Are there qualities and characteristics? Honesty, decent? Or is there something special about what they do? Because we're talking about who they are there, but what they do and how they do it. A good exercise to go through and have a debate and discussion around it. It is all about you, actually, but not in the selfish way. Remember what I said a little bit earlier? It's not about you and about it. It's not about ego. It's about the real you, knowing who you really are, because, poor little Patrick, if I don't know who I am, how am I going to enter into relationships with others? How am I going to feel comfortable in relationships? How am I going to influence through my relationships? So you do need to know who you are, what your values are. We can all grow and be better. Every day I get up, I have an opportunity. Today is a day of opportunity. I always think like that. Today is a day of opportunity. What is it I want to learn? What is it I would like to grow in, more positive in, or whatever? Warren Bennis was one of the greatest writers of all time in educational leadership, and he did go over into business and other areas as well. But I quote him because he was primarily an educational leader. Just read that and dissect it a little bit. The point is to become yourself. To enjoy the process of becoming. You're not going to be able to do that unless you're a reflective person, unless you are a thinking person, unless you are a person who grows. One of the other things that I've always done in my life in leadership positions is get feedback. I could be a legend in my own mind. Sometimes I am, actually. But that might not cut much ice with other people, or that might not help me influence other people. I need always other checks out there. So to get honest feedback, even at ACU, when I ran a program over 7 campuses, and many of them weren't present at all the meetings, we did it online, and I could never be sure what they were up to. I did know what some of them were up to, and it wasn't listening to me, but that's the reality. But seriously, I did get to a point where I knew people were engaged. And that is only after you prove yourself and they determine that you're a decent individual and you're doing your best and you're working hard and you are passionate about what you do. And they too, it's contagious. They too become passionate. I wanted to share a couple of little short ones. Some people have difficulty being present to themselves. Mr. Duffy lived a short distance away from his body. That's James Joyce and the Dubliners. I'm trying to cultivate a lifestyle that does not require my presence. Well, Woody Allen would say that, wouldn't he? Oscar Wilde, I often have long conversations. So clever. I don't understand a word I'm saying. Don't get into that trap. You know, if you're going to have these conversations with yourself, make them sensible conversations, and so they resolve something in terms of what you're trying to find out. And I came across this one only last year. I thought it's a great one. Oprah. Being authentic made her a very rich woman. Okay. A few things on presence, because I want to get on to some later slides. Many facets. It means being fully conscious and aware in the present moment. So I've always believed for a long time that, you know, as a leader of a group and of a department and whatever it was, I needed to pay attention. I needed to be focused and engaged and awake and alive to what the other people were doing. And it is that. It is that. In some cultures it's making eye contact, in others it's not. Often in our Western cultures, yeah, it's showing an interest, like showing your interest by looking at somebody. But it's much more than that. I learned a lot from a guy called John O'Donoghue, a philosopher and theologian. He captured this essence when he stated, presence is the way a person's individuality comes towards you. It's the soul texture of the person. That's the line I wanted you to notice. It's about the soul texture. It's going deeper to the level of the soul. Soul to soul now, not just eye to eye. Getting deeper, knowing the person much more deeply. What makes them tick. Any of you read Eckhart Tolle's work? His famous book was The Power of Now. Last book, I think it was the last one, it was the New Earth. And he made me focus on another aspect of presence. A type of consciousness, okay, so I have to be awake, I have to be engaged, I have to be ready, causes you to awaken to yourself and to the other. See, I thought it was awake to the other. He's saying, No, it's awake to yourself as well. So that when we're engaged in conversation or debate or whatever it is, I have to be aware of my contribution or lack of it in that relationship. Because it's too easy to blame the other if something goes wrong. So it's more than being aware and awake to the other. It's to myself. If something goes wrong in a meeting I'm holding, did I contribute to that? That's the awake to yourself. And if so, how did I contribute to that? It's not a blaming exercise, this. This is a reflective exercise. There's a certain stillness. And this I've practiced a lot in my time. Being present is infinitely more powerful than anything one can say or do. Although sometimes being present can give rise to words and actions. Can I say this to you? A great fault, and this has been shown in research over the years, of people in leadership positions is that they don't know when to be quiet. They don't know when to be silent. They're always saying and doing, and there's some sort of sense that if I'm not, I must be wanting in something. That's not true. Silence actually talks. Allowing silence, allowing people to connect to their own center is very important in a school setting, in organizational settings. Creating, and I'm not just talking here about physical space. In fact, I'm not really talking about physical space here in terms of creating that silence. I'm talking about mental, not crowding people. Somebody comes up with an idea, you don't immediately say, well, we tried that last year and it didn't work. There are 1,000 ways to kill people's initiative. And some of us are very practiced at it. We have a master's at least, and probably a PhD in how to do it. So don't think about that. Reflect on it. Are you guilty of that? If so, you can become a better Patrick. You can say, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to allow others to discover their own centers so that they can tell me truly what they think. And that's what we really want in leadership, to get the wisdom from everywhere. I did a lot of work, as some of you may or may not know, with Anglican over a number of years on presence and authentic relationship and authentic leadership. And Sylvia was a manager in Anglican here in Sydney. And they all kept journals over a period of some days. And then Sylvia wrote this. I asked her permission to use it because I thought it was brilliant. She was reflecting on her leadership. And she was saying, being truly present is knowing when to speak and when to be still. That's what I'm on about. When should I talk? When should I be quiet? When should I listen more? I need to respect the stillness, because in any loving relationship, there is a certain comfortableness in the silence. In your own personal relationships, in your own loving relationships. Silence, we say it's golden. Silence is golden. Well, why do we say it's golden? Because there's a power in it. And I know that from having spent 50 years with my partner next year, we don't have to say anything at all. Especially if she's annoyed, she doesn't have to say a word to me. It comes across loud and clear. Silence then tells me, wow, what now, Patrick, have you done? But let's be more positive in terms of its use in organizations. And she said, I shouldn't be afraid of this. That's the words I wanted you to see. Some leaders are afraid of that, afraid of not doing, not saying, of always having the answer. Don't do that. Learn to step back, learn to allow others to blossom and grow and develop. That's part of being a leader, isn't it? Growing leadership. This concept of collective ability, and I'm not a great fan of John Hattie's, I'll declare that out loud, but he's saying some good things recently, and this is what I love. The concept of collective, see, I talk about collective efficacy and collective responsibility. He's now talking collective efficacy. That is the belief of teachers about their collective ability to promote successful teacher outcomes within their schools. Their collective ability to do it. You can't do that on your own. You have to work together. That's why I like the concept of collective ability. And look at this. I never thought I'd see the day. And he said, and I think he's right, but he could have added something else. In Australia, we focus so much on the structural conditions of schools. Smaller class sizes, enforcing homework, retention rates. We don't actually, but he does. And ignore the influences that truly matter. Now, what are the influences that truly matter? He didn't name what the influences that truly matter, but I know what they are now because did you see the ABC documentary on the revolution schools? It was on only a few months ago. It was a cracker. And he watched it and he says, in that documentary on revolution schools in Australia, we're talking about, not Finland, you can see and hear the passion, the dedication, the commitment, the expertise, the never give up, the transformations, the joy of being a teacher, the joy of being a teacher, the passion of being a teacher. You see the raging hormones of the students as they develop into wonderful young adults. Brilliant, hooray, isn't that what we want? Serious. I hope he goes on in this vein and writes another book on this. And you can see that teachers have much to be credited with during this transformation. Agree with every word he says there in that second one. That's what it's all about. It's about a passion. It's about transformation. It's about transforming students' lives, of making them better people. And making them better people means that they have to be literate and numerate. I'm not in any way diminishing the importance of that side of it. But if we continue to test them into the ground, we're never going to achieve that thing we want to achieve. After 10 years now of it, what has happened to us in external tests, PISA and TIMSS, we're going down. So it was so good, the focus on evidence-based this and evidence-based that, but it's not evidence-based. It's only evidence-based in a very narrow area, and that is performance on test scores. Nothing wrong, don't go away from here saying Patrick is against testing, not at all. We need it for improvement, we need to use the results wisely, but perhaps testing our students nationally at 3, 5, 7, 9, and in New South Wales 12, the big one, might be seen by other countries, including Finland, as way too much. Finland doesn't do it at all, of course, you know, it only random samples. So when we work responsibly together, we create life-changing school environments. What I'm actually on about here is developing your presence in relationships to create real collaborative efforts, collective efforts to bring about improvement in the quality of learning environments, teaching and learning. Because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Teaching is a collegial profession, in case you have forgotten it, so therefore we should be working together. And as professionals with a vocation, that is, a calling to serve children, all educators should commit to and share a collective ethic of responsibility for leading quality student learning environments, that should be, and learning outcomes. Makes sense, doesn't it? Together, we have to be passionate about this. We are professionals. We talk about the type of leadership we should have. But when I see in the business world and other worlds, what they actually do in terms of leadership and management is they look at the main focus of what they're doing, the product, the output, whatever it is, and it's from there. The banks do the same. Should we be any different in education? We have to look at educating our young people in a variety of ways, not in just a narrow way, to develop their characters, for them to be able to engage and work multi-skilled in a challenging 21st century environment. And then we decide What is the nature of the leadership management we should have to achieve that? That was the same with, by the way, national curriculum. I had a strong argument at that time about our national curriculum. For whom? Nobody asked the question. A national curriculum for whom? Well, a vague idea is for our students. For what? Was never answered. We should have been able to determine what is the nature of the student we want to turn out into the 21st century environment. I'm talking secondary schools now, in Australia. And then back up from there. If that's the nature of the output, the student that we want for the environment, then what type of curriculum and what type of pedagogy will best deliver that? And back up again, it's called backward mapping to leadership. What's the nature of the leadership that will deliver that? I'll bet you 9 times out of 10 it'll be a collective efficacy of the teachers working together, or a collective responsibility for the quality of the learning environments and the learning outcomes in our schools. It's not rocket science. We don't do it, unfortunately. Oh, and not to work together is an ethical current start. I was on a stage with Sharon O'Neill, who was the Director General in WA, and this was a great line for me because I was going on to talk about collective efficacy and collective responsibility. And she said, the right people understand, in education she means, that they do not have jobs, they have responsibilities. We are responsible together for the quality of learning in our schools. We are all responsible for it. It's not good enough for some teachers to say, to close the classroom door and go in and say, I'm the professional, I'll do it my way, and I'm the responsible one in here. It doesn't work like that in a collegial profession, and should never work like that. We have to work together. We have an ethical responsibility to work together for the common good of our students. I believe that authentic educational leaders transform students each day into, and this is a friend of mine, Jerry Starrett, who wrote this a few years ago, but I think it's brilliant stuff, into something special and something that enables their human spirits to soar. We don't talk like that in our schools often, not often enough anyway. Yet, I think we mean that for our students. We mean them to be successful in the very best ways. These would be good discussions to have, wouldn't they? What constitutes success for our students in life? I wished we had done more of that at the time of the national curriculum, at least have a debate on it, have a discussion around it. Their actions are so inspiring and uplifting that their schools become flourishing places for students, parents, teachers, and all stakeholders. I know that some of you in the room are influenced by the thinking behind positive psychology. The word flourishing comes out of positive psychology, which is looking at character strengths and building on them. Martin Seligman, who's the man who coined the phrase positive psychology, suggested that glimpsing the vision of a flourishing human future is life-changing. We're in the life-changing game as educators. We're not in a production factory like Anthony Seldon. You know who Anthony Seldon is, anybody? He's the principal of Waverley College in the UK, or was, he just stepped down. He wrote a book recently on English schools as factory schools. And that's what he's on about. Just churning out, but no life-changing, no flourishing, none of glimpsing. Our schools need to be life-changing. In our schools, we are responsible for generating cultures that promote and support Christian beliefs, Christian schools, and values that respect the dignity and worth of all those we engage with. We believe, because we believe they are made in God's image and likeness. I said that earlier. Authentic leaders help create flourishing schools that are life-changing. Let me rephrase that. You create flourishing schools that are life-changing. Let me rephrase it again. You must create flourishing schools that are life-changing. It's all about transforming lives. sending out young, well-rounded people who will be able to not just cope, but thrive in a challenging context of 21st century Australia and the world, because many of them will go around the world. Implications for you as a leader. Be present to yourself, not in a selfish way, not in an egotistical way, but knowing who's Patrick and how can I become a better Patrick. That's what I mean. There is a person with whom you spend more time than any other, a person who has more influence over you and more ability to interfere with you or to support your growth than anyone else. This ever-present companion is you, yourself. So you've got to be in touch with yourself. You've got to be a reflective person. And above all, because you're leaders, you must be reflective and you must help your reflections by getting feedback as well. If we ever hope to be effective leaders of others, which we all want to be, isn't that right, here in this room? We must first be effective leaders of ourselves. And what we mean by that is we have to be able to improve ourselves, find out where we have little shortcomings, build on our strengths, and if we have any areas for improvement, let's improve them. And remember, it's a long way to find out who you are. It's a journey. Who is Patrick, I always say. Well, I'm not sure yet. I still have a way to go, I hope. And I know that I'll probably die and not know who the real Patrick is. Will the real Patrick stand up? That's the challenge. When am I Patrick? Think about this. Am I Patrick on Monday morning, when I go full of enthusiasm to school or wherever I go? Am I Patrick on the weekend when I'm watching footy and my team's winning? And how about on a Friday afternoon when I'm frazzled and everybody around me is frazzled? Am I Patrick then, or will the real Patrick stand up? And you won't be able to find, there will be many Patricks, is what I'm saying, but make them all be influential in a positive way.
For more information about Anglican EdComm, go to edcomm.org.au. Anglican EdComm, promoting biblically shaped education.